Good morning, everybody. I'm Dara Turnbull, the Research Coordinator at Housing Europe, one of the three partners in the Housing 2030 initiative. You're all very, very welcome to this, the second thematic conference of 4 conferences as part of the Housing 2030 initiative. Today's conference, of course, is about the whole issue of environmental sustainability and livable cities and how we can achieve the goals that we have set for ourselves in a way that is affordable and accessible for people, particularly those on lower and medium incomes. So just give you a very quick overview of the day. So if you are tweeting about the event, I would ask you to please use the hashtag Housing2030. If you have any questions for the speakers or for the panelists in our Q&A section, I would ask you to please use the Q&A box, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. And for the panelists, I would ask you to please keep your microphone and camera off, except when it is your time to speak. To give you a quick rundown of the agenda we have for today, so we'll have in a few moments welcome addresses, including that from Councillor Susan Aiken, the leader of Glasgow City Council. Today's event, when we had conceived it a few months ago, was originally meant to take place in the beautiful city of Glasgow in order to coincide with the COP26, which is meant to have happened this week. Unfortunately, we all know that things have changed a bit since then, so we're moving this online, but we're still very happy that the City of Glasgow is giving their support and their patronage to today's event. Following the welcoming addresses, we'll have a quick update on the research which has already taken place on the Housing 2030 project from Dr. Julia Lawson. Followed by that, we'll have a presentation from Holger Wellbaum, who will be taking us through what we call the policy toolkit, some of the kind of the main initiatives and tools that people use when they're looking at this issue of delivering high quality, environmentally sound housing that's also accessible and affordable. Following that, we'll have our main kind of panel discussion of the day. We're very happy to have Martin van der Heijn, the chairperson of ADES, the Dutch Federation of Housing Corporations, Brian Evans, the city urbanist from Glasgow, and Holger will be joining us again. Following that, we'll have a digital coffee break, which I'm sure after that long and intense, but hopefully interesting discussion will be much needed. Following our coffee break, we have our keynote address, which is from Executive Vice President of the European Commission, Frans Timmermans. And following that, we're going to have a series of what we kind of call elevator pitches. So that's a series of short presentations of one good policy initiative from a number of different backgrounds. So we have a great selection of speakers from a number of different countries in Europe, and then we'll wrap up the day. So we'll finish at about 12 o'clock UK time, which is about 1 o'clock, of course, in Brussels and most of mainland Europe. So I'd like to introduce the first of our speakers today, Councillor Susan Aiken, who I already mentioned is the leader of Glasgow City Council. Susan is a member of the Scottish National Party and since May 2017 has had the distinguished honour of leading Glasgow City Council. Susan, we're very sorry that we couldn't be with you in Glasgow this morning, but anyway, we're delighted that we can still join us for this event, and I give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Dara, and it's a pleasure to see so many friends from UNECE here again. We may not be in Glasgow this morning, but I think the event is of Glasgow, perhaps, and comes with some of the spirit of Glasgow. So a very warm welcome to you all this morning to this virtual Housing 2030 conference. Today's event is another staging post in the flourishing and deepening relationship between the City of Glasgow and the United Nations, and in particular with the Economic Commission for Europe and the family of cities that are represented through its Forum of Mayors. And I believe that this is the 5th time in a little over 3 years that as leader of Glasgow City Council, I've had the honour of speaking at a UNECE event. Just a few weeks ago, I was privileged to be one of the mayors addressing the Forum of Mayors on how Glasgow is addressing the twin challenges of the climate emergency and COVID recovery, to share with our peers our experience, insight and ambitions, and to again express our willingness to collaborate on those pressing and critical issues of our times. So today's Housing 2030 conference is though a source of some personal pride in the city, because it illustrates UNECE's continuing recognition of how Glasgow has been building healthier, more sustainable and more inclusive communities. The City Living Conference that we hosted in Glasgow last September culminated in the signing of the Glasgow Declaration. And that was a clear signal of our commitment to embrace what's required of being a UN exemplar city on the placemaking and affordable housing agendas. And the Committee on Urban Development, Housing and Land Management has shown its commitment to Glasgow with another important event hosted from the city. Of course, all of us had hoped that the conference would have taken place as originally intended, as Dara told us, in person and as part of COP26. But it's entirely fitting and really most welcome that the UN should instead be part of our 1 year to go countdown to COP. And in these challenging times, I'll certainly settle for that. COP has these past few weeks in particular thrust Glasgow to the forefront of global conversations on the role of the city in the climate emergency. The virtual event has allowed us to plug into an international network of peer cities to nurture those shared agendas and find common cause on climate action. And it's also allowed Glasgow to increase our international visibility and build a sense of momentum in our own city. While, again, it's always disappointing that we can't meet in person, the advent of virtual events has meant that I've spoken in recent weeks to people as far apart as Chile and Singapore and the United States, which I wouldn't have been able to do otherwise, and perhaps if we hadn't got our proficiency with using Zoom and other digital platforms to the level that we have done over the past few months. Crucially, all of that has also allowed us to refine and repeat our message that the aspirations of COP must be shared with and relevant to ordinary Glaswegians and their communities. Climate justice must also be about global justice. About social justice, rather. COP will happen with and alongside the people of Glasgow, not simply happen to them. Today's event really does underscore that message, and perhaps nowhere better than in the final session of today on upgrading homes to meet our sustainability targets without increasing heating costs for those on low and moderate incomes. That session is presented by Dr. Elena Skolgajova, sorry, I always get that wrong, Elena, I can't get that right, who last year worked with our very own city urbanist, Professor Brian Evans, to draw up the Glasgow Declaration. And I'd really like to welcome Elena, albeit virtually, back to Glasgow. You've been a great friend of our city in recent years. Housing will be pivotal to Glasgow reaching our net zero targets. Delivering on climate and social justice will, of course, require many programmes and interventions, but arguably more than any other single area of focus, the issue of emissions from homes has the potential to make a difference to the lives of many Glaswegians. In 2020, around a third of our citizens still live with fuel and energy poverty. That's got a damaging effect on their health, on their quality of life, and on the financial sustainability of individuals, households, and indeed entire communities. So addressing fuel poverty is a significant social justice challenge for our city. Addressing one of its root causes is also a significant carbon neutrality challenge. If I can cite one potential transformational project in its embryonic stages to illustrate this point, Glasgow's historic high-density housing model, our pre-1919 3- and 4-storey tenements, help define the look and feel of our city, and they have significant cultural, historical and urban value and are home to over 70,000 residents here in the city. But their age and design means that they are particularly poor at holding heat. Their thermal performance is not great. And by next June, though, we know that thanks to a project led by our partners at the University of Glasgow and one of our community-led housing associations, what technology will be best suited to retrofitting these iconic homes, the cost, the economic impact, and the timescales for delivery. It is a generational challenge, but also a generational opportunity. Climate change already threatens to have a disproportionate impact on our young people, on the poorest and the most marginalised communities, those who contribute least to greenhouse gas emissions, but are also least able to prepare, respond and recover from its impacts. And that's as true on a global scale as it is within cities and within communities right across the world. And that's what we must mitigate against. And today's event offers a platform to discuss solutions which are affordable, equitable and sustainable. It's unfortunate, but it is inevitable that we're unable to meet in person in Glasgow today. But hopefully, and I hope very much, that as we move from the challenges of COVID to the opportunities of COP26, I'll be able to welcome as many of you as possible to Glasgow this time next year. COP is an incredible opportunity to add momentum to all of our current ambitions and encourage us all to try harder still in pursuit of them. We all want it to be the point at which the world looks up from COVID, takes stock and resets our planetary future on a safer and more just course. Thank you very much for listening, and I wish you all the best for the rest of today's conference. The agenda looks absolutely fascinating, and I have no doubt that it will make a significant contribution towards making those preparations for COP26 next year, which might be the most important diplomatic event that any of us will be part of in our lifetimes. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Susan. It's great, very inspiring words to kick us off this morning. From Glasgow, we now move to the southeast of Europe. Dara Sandoni is the Director General of the National Housing Agency in Albania and the Chair of the UNECE Committee on Urban Development, Housing and Land Management. Doris, it's good to see you again. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dara. Just a small correction. I'm now Director of Housing Policy Department at the Ministry of Finance and Economy. I'm really amazed, and I thank you for giving me the floor, Ms. Conselheira Aitken and colleagues. I'm really amazed to see so many excellencies in one event, excellencies in housing and urban development and planning. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all in this online conference, which on behalf of UNECE Committee on Urban Development, Housing and Land Management. Just an information for those that don't know, UNECE is the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, which is one of the 5 regional commissions of United Nations, and our committee is one of the oldest one of this region, of these commissions. This conference is organized as part of the Housing 2030 initiative, and I'd like to give my special thanks to City of Glasgow and particularly to Ms. Susan Aitken for her leadership in promoting the importance of adequate and affordable housing as the basis of living well. And I would also like to thank our partners, which are long-lasting partners, Housing Europe and UN-Habitat, with whom we work intensively on these topics. The last 8 months, we all have witnessed an unprecedented situation of lockdown and social distancing, which have changed our behavior somehow. Hopefully not forever, but at least for now, our behavior has changed. The anti-pandemic measures turned the attention to the importance of adequate housing and living conditions as the most visible cause-effect relation. a relation that is more difficult to trace with climate change due to their long-term impact. The pandemic provided real images seen only in fiction movies and demonstrated that the transformation of urban spaces can happen overnight. For example, air quality had improved even in the most polluted cities. If there is only one lesson to learn from this crisis, it is that rapid change of our urban reality is possible and behavior patterns can be adapted. The question that we have to answer today is how can we make necessary improvements to the energy efficiency and quality of our building stock in a way that is affordable and accessible for those on lower income. I remember 2-3 years ago at one of the committee sessions, I presented on energy efficiency and affordable housing projects. At that time, I was General Director of National Housing Agency. That projects that were developed by our agency. And I concluded with a question: how to improve the quality of life of poor households and reduce their costs for energy? And I brought an example from a project whose calculation based on energy consumption suggested inefficiency of retrofitting because the return on investment would need more than 50 years. And this was because the project didn't take into account the fact that poor families save energy by giving up on comfort. In the case of poor families, we don't discuss on reducing the CO2 emissions, but on improving the quality of life. And we don't discuss about cost efficiency. However, there is a lot of space for innovations and cost reduction in investing in more energy efficient and more sustainable houses. I hope that we will have more answers today to this question from City of Glasgow that is implementing the Glasgow model of living, as well as from other speakers of the panels. I also would like to remind you that Housing 2030 is building its work on the Geneva UN Charter on Sustainable Housing. This document underlined the importance of implementing urban planning and housing construction in cities in a way which minimizes environmental impact and promotes environmental sustainability and improve health of the population. I also would like to make another point. It was also mentioned by Councillor Atkinson. Aitken, that our policies that we develop at national level are implemented at local level. So local authorities should be part of our discussions and part of our policy agendas, that when we develop, we have to make sure that they are engaged, because they are the main authorities that are responsible for implementing the 2030 agenda, the SDGs, the Geneva UN Charter principles and goals, and a lot of other documents. So for this purpose, we organized for the first time in our history of committee of UNECE, a forum of mayors, which brought together 40 mayors and vice mayors from 36 countries in the UNECE region to share their experience in addressing the impact of disasters and climate change and action needed to strengthen local government preparedness and response to them. They also endorsed a Geneva Declaration of the Forum of Mayors, which is a forward-looking document. And especially the mayors stress in the declaration their political engagement to use the current momentum to rebuild the cities, where all people can thrive. Quality of life is the guiding principle. Nature and biodiversity are an integral part of urban planning. Sustainable economies generate wealth for all. Solidarity among city dwellers prevail. Inequalities are actively narrowed. So it looks a bit like utopia, but it is what we should aim at the end, because everything should have people at center, and the improvement of the living condition, or especially for those that are in less advantaged conditions. So another message from this was that we should consider this big challenge that we are facing of the pandemic as an opportunity to invent and to that can guide us into new venture for developing our cities in a way that our cities become accessible and affordable, and also better places for living. The declaration of mayors also allows city leaders. Yes, yeah, the final. The declaration aligns city leaders' efforts with the initiative of UN Secretary General to build back better. But at the end, my last words are wishing you all good luck with the proceedings of the conference, and looking forward to the messages of this conference that will be included in the document that will be prepared and presented next year to the ministers' conference in Geneva. Thank you, and see you all next time.
Thank you very much, Doris. It is now my pleasure to introduce Bent Madsen. Bent is the President of Housing Europe and also the Managing Director of BL, the Danish Federation of Non-Profit Housing Associations. I look forward to your intervention. Bent, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. While we are still focused on the COVID-19 at the moment, the environmental questions remain the most important challenge that our planet faces. To reduce the CO2 emissions and keep further increase in global temperature to no more than 1.5 degrees, that is our clear objective. Most of us today, we know already that the key role that the housing sector must play in this. Buildings in Europe account for around 40% of the energy consumption and 36% of the greenhouse gas emissions. This is not sustainable, not for our planet, not for many millions of people across Europe, and not for our pockets. I'm very delighted that the Executive Vice President of the European Commission, Frans Timmermans, is joining us today. He and his colleagues have set a very ambitious target for reducing greenhouse gas emissions from building and built environment by 60% compared to 2015 levels between now and 2030. This work is essential not just for us today, but for generations which we will hope come after us. So I want to say to Mr. Timmermans that when it comes to meeting these targets, he has an ally in social, public, and cooperative housing providers in Europe. The mission of cooperative, public, and social housing providers is to provide affordable homes in sustainable communities, and this work is becoming even more essential now as a result of the economic and social impact of this pandemic. However, we are committed to reducing the carbon footprints of those homes, both in construction and in the use phase. In fact, we Housing Europe members have come together to set ourselves a challenge to renovate 4 million homes by 2030 across Europe. This 4 million homes challenge is being announced today and comes with a guarantee of affordability, as the renovations carried out in our sector do not come with rent hikes. But for this to happen, we need a guarantee that of the right support when it's needed from the policymakers. You will hear today from members of Housing Europe from Belgium, Netherlands, Estonia, and more about the work they are doing to lead renovation and tackling energy poverty for their citizens. We know what must be done, and we know how to do it. With these supports, real progress is possible. I'm proud to come from Denmark, where we're so lucky to have a revolving fund financed by tenants that ensures investment in energy renovations in our non-profit social housing stock. Right now, we will invest more than 30 billion kroner until 2026 of our tenants' savings. In average, we save about 30% in energy consumption when we renovate old buildings. This brings savings on the energy bills for the tenants, it brings health benefits, and it supports the green transition of the Danish economy. Actually, the 30 billion scheme was a political decision by the Danish parliament, and it will support the recovery of the Danish economy. So in short, in Denmark, we have tried to step in the footsteps of the renovation wave already, and we support your ambitions, Mr. Timmermans. And I hope for a very fruitful dialogue on how to achieve them best. And bringing things back to today's conference, the central question is posed as how do we make the necessary renovations, but in a way that is affordable and accessible for all, even those on low and moderate incomes. The members of Housing Europe must play a significant role in answering this question, and we stand ready to do so. So I look forward to hearing from the Executive Vice President Chair, as well as the rest of today's speakers. And I know and trust that Dr. Julie Lawson, Dr. Holger Waldbaum, and the rest of the writing team behind Housing 2030 report are also waiting for your inputs on this very important issue, not just today, but over the coming month as well. And I would like to begin by thanking all of those who have made today's conference and events possible. The work of Housing 2030 initiative is of vital importance at this time of such great uncertainty. Having access to stable, affordable, and secure housing is thus a key ingredient in improving people's well-being and the mental health. Therefore, knowledge sharing events like this are of vital importance. As President of Housing Europe, I would like to thank our partners and the UNECE and UN-Habitat. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Bent. So for this session at least, last but not least, we have Christophe Lalonde. I'm not sure exactly where you're joining us from in the world today, Christophe. It could be Kenya, it could be anywhere depending on the day of the week, I'm sure. Christophe is the leading housing specialist at the Land, Housing and Shelter section at UN-Habitat. Christophe, I give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Dara. And I'm in Europe these days, so not in Nairobi for now, but hoping to be back there very soon. It's really my pleasure to join this event on behalf of UN-Habitat and as part of this joint initiative, Housing 2030, to address the importance of the challenges of housing affordability in Europe, together with our partners, Housing Europe and UNECE, who had indeed a very long-standing partnership with the Economic Commission in Europe. And we are very pleased with this partnership that is touching on a very, very core issue in the region, but also globally. I also want to take the opportunity to thank the City of Glasgow and also Madam Aitken for the very kind words and very welcoming words to Glasgow with our host today. And we are very thankful for your partnership and collaboration, and we look forward to work much closer together, Madam Aitken. This event, as we said, is part of a series of events that we are implementing jointly with Housing Europe and the Economic Commission as part of the Housing 2030 initiative. This one is particularly focusing on the issues of environmental sustainability. That is also at the core of the work that we are doing at UN-Habitat. And in this regard, we see like this as an opportunity to address two types of challenges. First of all, like the possibility to really be able to reduce the cost of housing for people and for the poorest household by improving the sustainability of the housing stock, by innovating in building materials, and by like inventing new ways of using houses. But also like this highlights that housing has a key role to play in order like to face the challenge of a changing climate, but also like to reduce the greenhouse gas emission globally. And as part of this effort, I'm also very proud to recall that we have a very strong partnership with our colleagues as well from the UN Environment Programme and all the associated partners through the Global Alliance for Building and Construction, but also through the One Planet Network, which is a very strong network globally of UN agencies, private sector, researchers, to advance on the issues of sustainable buildings and constructions. This is like a very interesting also initiative in order to address these issues and to look for solutions in Europe to reduce the cost of housing. One of the mantra of this initiative is that actually green housing is affordable. And I hope that, you know, this could be like perhaps one of the outcomes of the discussion today. I also wanted to take the opportunity to highlight some of the work that we have been doing at UN-Habitat recently over the past months. During Urban October, we had the opportunity to launch a campaign on housing, and this also reminds us of the centrality of housing in like social economic development for countries. We have been like tackling the issues of homelessness to promote like the right to adequate housing. These are really like issues at the core of our mandate, but also we believe that these are like entry points for solutions for more equitable and more sustainable cities in the globe and in Europe in particular. So Dara, I thank you very much for the opportunity to speak at the opening, and I look forward to the interaction and the questions also like from all the participants I see like joining the event. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Christophe. So that is the conclusion of our opening section. Now to move to the more meat and bones of today's event, which is kind of looking at this Housing 2030 initiative. So to give you a very brief update, I'm sure many of you have been following this project, or at least I would hope so, but to give you a very brief overview of the work that we've already achieved as part of the Housing 2030 initiative, I would like to hand you over to Julie Lawson to give us her feedback. Julie, amongst her many titles and responsibilities, is the honorary professor at the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology. But more importantly, at least for today, she is the lead writer of the Housing 2030 publication. Julie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dara, and thank you to all the distinguished people who are introducing this important workshop. I'd like to share my screen. If you can see it now.
It's good, Julie.
Okay. The Housing 2030 initiative, which I'm involved, have the honour of being involved in, is very much about positive solutions, positive policy tools that can be used to shape better housing markets, to shape better housing systems. Its focus is very much on affordability, but recognises that affordability is very much an outcome of many different dynamic cross-cutting policies and market processes involved in land markets, in circuits of investment, affecting our incomes and the kind of supports that we have in our daily lives, and also in housing assistance. It very much is an active project which has a series of workshops, of which this is one of them. It's very much focused on tools and illustrations of those tools and how they work in practice. And it has some fairly significant partners, UNECE, Housing Europe and UN-Habitat, who are at the forefront of policy, best practice and promotion. It builds on some important principles about social inclusion and participation, economic effectiveness and productivity, environmental protection, and also cultural adequacy, given we're dealing with an incredibly diverse range of countries from right across Northern Europe, also to Northern America as well. It has 4 chapters which concern governance of housing policies and institutions, access and availability of land for affordable housing, climate neutral housing that is affordable and inclusive, which we're going to talk about today, and also the important finance and funding of investing in affordable housing too. We see this as very much a toolkit, not a blueprint, something which we hope to provide relevant and appropriate tools in which countries ask themselves, why is housing unaffordable and inaccessible for households in my country? What changes to my housing system would increase access to affordable housing? And therefore, what policy tools are appropriate to generate the required outcomes, and what capacities are required to implement this policy at the appropriate scale? So I mentioned governance being one key chapter, which will be looking at a number of tools I mentioned here. We've focused on land policy through a very large interactive workshop that was held in May. We've drafted that chapter now, and we've also invited input via the website Housing 2030, and we have a survey that went out to all member states as well, which asked for their input to best practices. Today we're going to be talking about climate neutral housing, in which you'll hear about different tools involved in regulating, non-regulatory policy initiatives as well, standards, also financial incentives and funding, and also awareness raising, and importantly, training to build capacity to deliver more climate neutral housing in the future. Our last chapter, also very important, we'll look at the kind of tools that will be involved in financing and funding more affordable housing, looking at a whole range of tools from regulating the operation of financial institutions to tax provisions influencing housing investment and so on. Where to now? Well, the important message, of course, is that housing policy is very much part of the solution to addressing housing affordability and climate crisis, and will now be used, of course, in the pandemic recovery. It's important to build on some solid principles, and we outline what they can be and suggest the principles of the Geneva UN Charter is very important in refining useful tools, sharing and learning from good and also bad practice. The hard work continues, and we have some more focused workshops attracting hopefully high-level support and input, expert input, and the survey remains open. There are more podcasts. Hopefully you've listened to the first 6 that are online on the website, and we look forward to more input and involvement. We'll come back to this at the end of the workshop, but just to highlight now, as I mentioned, there is the Housing 2030 website. We have the podcast series, which is ongoing. I hope you enjoyed those, listening to them. We have the UNECE survey. Also, we have these workshops. The last one on land you can listen to, you can see the whole thing. Today's workshop will be recorded and you can play back and listen. Also, we'll be having one in February on good governance and regulation, which will be a very interesting one, supported by the Ministry of Housing in Slovenia. Also coming in April, the Housing Agency in Ireland will be hosting a special workshop on finance and funding. And of course, finally, we'll be having the launch of the final report at the UNECE ministerial meeting in October 2021. So thank you for your attention, and I look forward to hearing furthermore now from Holger. So Holger is one of our chapter drafting team, a very important one. He is a full professor of sustainable housing and building at Chalmers University of Technology in Gothenburg in Sweden. He's an internationally renowned expert in the field of various kinds of sustainability assessments of buildings and all forms of infrastructure, including housing infrastructure, and a frequent member of evaluation committees at EU member states and research councils. Thank you very much, Holger. I very much look forward to hearing your outline and presentation today.
Thanks a lot, Julie. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to everybody. It's a pleasure to be here and having the opportunity to talk you through. Just give me a sec, and I can share my screen with you. So now you should be able to see the screen, I guess. Let me just close that one. So, as said, a pleasure to be here. So what I would like to do is talk you through one of the, from my point of view, utmost relevant issues the society is facing actually today. So this is climate change, environmental as well as health impacts, and finally affordability. These are really challenges in the long term that I unbelievably would call even more demanding than the current pandemic. And it's not really very likely that we will be able to develop a vaccine against climate and the biodiversity crisis. So this is really a very important topic and issue that we have to contribute to and to solve. So I'm very happy to be part of this exciting initiative from Housing Europe, UN-Habitat and UNECE. And I would like to talk you through the positive policy solutions for climate neutral and affordable housing solution in the UNECE region. As already mentioned earlier by Bent, we are aware that the EU countries have committed to reducing domestic greenhouse gas emissions until 2030. So we raised in the last months even the bar from 40% to 55% compared to the 1990 levels. What we also are aware, and this has been mentioned by Bengt, about the huge importance of the building sector regarding the energy consumption, which are around 40% on the EU level, and the greenhouse gas emissions that sums up to 36% of the total greenhouse gas emissions. What have been done in the last decades, actually? So what we have seen is that the EU Parliament and the Council have launched and enforced two main decrees. One is the Energy Performance of Building Directive, with a lot of things that have been introduced to reduce or increase the energy efficiency of the buildings. At the same time, the Energy Efficiency Directive have been introduced, with also a very important instrument, which is the long-term renovation strategies that the EU member states have really to come up with. And then this is a typo here, actually. What we also have seen is that we have a lot of innovations developed in the last decades, technologies on the material side, highly energy efficient heat pumps, renewable energy resources. We have reduced the carbon emissions of our construction products. We have worked on a lot of educational and vocational training programs. A lot of policy have been introduced. So a lot of stuff have really happened. And this is fantastic, actually. And I'm very happy that I can share with you today a lot of these very positive policy tools that have been implemented and introduced into the markets. Fact is, nevertheless, that we have to consider that in the developing countries, we need to accommodate roughly 2.4 billion new urban residents by 2050. So here we are talking about new build. This is a huge demand that we have to satisfy, and we have to come up with a very intelligent solution to really make this climate friendly as possible and affordable. What we also have to consider is that in Europe, most of the buildings are older than 50 years. And many of them have been built before the minimum energy efficiency standards were implemented. Most of you are aware that the first energy efficiency standards in building heating regulations have been introduced actually by the colleagues in Denmark that have been the first, followed by other companies in the 60s and 70s. And this is actually what we also do see when having a proper look on the existing building stock. What I show you here is just one example that I have picked randomly, which is very representative for the existing building stock that we do see around in Europe. So on the y-axis, you see the energy demand in kilowatt hours per square meter in year of different buildings that have been built. Here on the, let me show you here, this is the x-axis, and this is over years. So what you do see is buildings that have been built here in the year before 1900, after the Second World War, slowly in the 50s, going down to the building stock that we have today in 2020. And what you do see is here really the impact and the effect of the introduction of the regulation on energy efficiency on buildings, which helped us to dramatically minimize the energy consumption of the new buildings that have been built in the 70s and 80s and 90s, and especially later. But what you also do see here is if we are moving forward and looking backwards from 2050, what we do see is that still the major share of the building stock are buildings that have been built before the year 2000, that we really have to work on, especially the buildings before 1980 that are responsible for the major chunk of the energy consumption and carbon emissions. Most of these buildings are also still equipped with fossil-based heating systems in major parts of Europe, which are contributing heavily to the greenhouse gas emissions that we have talked about earlier. What we also have to take into consideration, and this has been mentioned in the opening talk by Susan this morning, that we are affected and confronted by energy poverty. So we have roughly 87 million people living in poor quality dwellings. And energy poverty is really a very widespread phenomenon that is hitting 11% of the Europeans. And you see the numbers here actually, that we have 54 million people that cannot keep their home adequately warm. And this is certainly an unacceptable situation that we have to get rid of. And the major impacts or the major contributors to this situation are poor energy efficiency of our building stock and energy prices, low income people that are heavily affected and they do not really have the means to cover the energy bills that they have to pay on the monthly rate or on a daily rate, as in many countries throughout Europe. So if you have to choose between a certain temperature, 18, 19 degrees in your home or a Christmas present, this is really a situation that is not acceptable in a region like we are in. What I would like to show you is after we have introduced a lot of policy measures that I have referred to earlier, we had a large focus on the new build, which has changed over time, and we have introduced different tools as well, taking care of the existing building stock. But what I would like to share with you is just one study, but I would call it really representative for what we have seen in the last decade. With the very good ambition to reduce energy demand and greenhouse gas emissions of the existing building stock, we have analyzed a couple of renovation projects throughout Europe, and this is just a snapshot here for the Scandinavian situation. So what we have seen is that we have all the technologies and we have a lot of knowledge available to bring down the energy consumption by 50, 60, sometimes even to 70% or 75%. So we are capable to do this, but this progress or impact comes with a cost. And what we have seen is that we have, through a lot of renovation projects, really increased the rents by, you see it here, 70% up to 50%, which is certainly not the situation that is affordable. So with the good ambition of reducing the carbon emissions and increasing energy efficiency, we have also contributed to the fact that people needed to move out of renovated buildings. But what we also do see is that we have learned, and what I can show you here in this energy saving pyramid, that we have to combine different parameters and aspects to come down to affordable renovation solutions. So we have to work on understanding the energy consumption, where it comes from. We have to tackle energy conservation through intelligent measures. We have to improve energy efficiency, and we have to introduce renewable energies. And lucky enough, what I've been, or the entire team actually have been thrilled by, is that there are so many initiatives out there and policies that have been introduced to really work towards affordable housing and climate neutral housing solutions. I will come back to it a little bit later. So what I would like to do is to share with you a very brief snapshot on policy initiatives. And I beg your pardon if I have not represented or picked randomly one of your countries. And as Bent and Julie said earlier, please forward your good practices also to us. We would be more than excited to spread the word actually about good examples also from your countries. But a few examples that I would like to share with you on regulation and standards. A very interesting initiative that is currently under discussion and will very likely be a national needed regulation afterwards is the thing that is currently discussed within the French Energy and Climate Act. They are discussing about introducing mandatory audits for existing buildings as from 2022. And this might include a national obligation to renovate all buildings of certain energy classes according to the energy performance certificates. So poorly energy performing buildings, energy classes F and G, will have requirements to bring it up to energy class at least D. Obviously, this has to be compensated and supported by larger investments and renovation funds. I will come back to this a little bit later. In Germany, what has been introduced is within the German Energy and Conservation Act, they have introduced that a replacement of all combustion units that are based on fossil energy carriers and older than 30 years, all of them have to be replaced in a certain grace period. So this is certainly an initiative which helps us to phase out and ban sooner than later fossil energy carriers. Let's move forward to another very exciting example, I think, on a non-regulatory policy initiative that has been launched in 2019 by the colleagues in the Netherlands. And this is really an agreement with the sector, electricity, industry, built environment, including here real estates, housing associations, traffic and transport industries, and agriculture. And this is really a joint effort to achieve the national climate goals in the Netherlands. They have decided, interesting enough, to phase out natural gas, which is the main source of heat supply for over 7 million households in the Netherlands by 2050. So this is really a very encouraging effort and showing us that we really have to go above the win-win situations, and we have also to kill our darlings actually to make really progress towards a climate neutral Europe. And you see it here as a first step. The Dutch government has set the goal to have 1.5 million households connected to a new heating system by 2030. And municipalities have now to come up with these heat plans by 2021, looking into the opportunities and the solutions, how really to provide these households beyond fossil energy carriers. So a very exciting initiative that really can make a difference, I would say. Then a very classical and very powerful tool, obviously, are financial incentives. This is really the backbone of the transformation of the current building stock. What we have seen, and I was really excited to see how many countries have really introduced throughout the world. This is what we have looked into together with the help of UNECE, which kind of state housing development funds. We have seen initiatives from Spain that in Catalonia, we will talk later about Barcelona as well, investment into solar energy generation. We have seen Slovakia, Elena will talk about a little bit later, non-repayable grants on favorable loans to improve the thermal insulation of residential buildings and apartments. We have seen in Sweden and in Luxembourg, for instance, VAT and tax deduction on renovation activities, mainly on labor costs, but also partly on materials. Bent already mentioned the Danish National Building Foundation revolving fund, feed-in by tenants, implemented by the government, a very interesting model. Scotland have been mentioned. We have fantastic examples of long-term low-interest public loans with various conditions and ambition levels introduced by Scotland, Austria, Germany, but many, many other countries as well. What we are also see and became aware in the last decades, it's about knowledge, it's about innovation, and it's about finance, yes. But at the end of the day, all renovation work has to be delivered by skilled labor. It doesn't do us a favor, neither environmentally, nor regarding the environmental or the health impacts, actually, nor economically, if building renovation is done poorly. So what is very important is that we have skilled labor that is trained, that we have quality assurance in place that is helping us to really supervise the executed renovation work and assure that what has been delivered is really properly, that we are avoiding mold growth in our buildings, that we are really cutting back energy demand and saving the budget of our tenants. This is really key. What we also learned in a couple of projects also funded by the Horizon 2020 projects research framework is that we have to engage tenants. We have to take them on board. We have to learn with them, and we have to make them also the advocates and to lobby for a renovation activity. They need to be informed, they need to be engaged, because they are also part of the change makers at the end of the day. Our behavior is also very important to achieve the energy goals. Education is also key, and this is not only key on the tenant level, it's also key that the landlords and real estate owners get a solid coaching and training. Coming to the end of my presentation, what is also key, and this is now I'm talking to you as an academic, we haven't also not done our homework yet. We have to introduce specific master programs on housing renovation. Too few are really available. We have to work on damage-free construction projects, and many initiatives have been launched through all over the world, actually, on vocational and educational training, fantastic and necessary. This is really key. So what we are working on, and a successful policy toolkit has to consider, is really the attractiveness of new build compared to renovation. We have to overcome and make the existing building stock also interesting to be invested in. We have to overcome the split incentive phenomenon that investors are not benefiting really from the investments. And this has really to be overcome. We have to work on labor costs. We have to make it cheaper. And you see also we have to work on awareness raising and capacity building, and we have to produce and take the power of artificial intelligence to generate data really to renovate the existing buildings. So at the end of the day, and this is my last slide, what we have to work on, what we have seen is there are fantastic instruments in the market on a national level. And I call these nice instruments playing together like a little chamber concert. You know, a few instruments, very nice atmosphere. What we have to work towards is, from my point of view, to build up a larger orchestra with well-tuned instruments, regulations, standard, non-regulatory policy initiatives, financial incentives, awareness raising and training, to make it a powerful symphony. And this is actually what I see the chance and the power and the beauty of the EU Green Deal that really can make a difference for the built environment. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
So, Holger, many thanks indeed for that superb presentation. I loved the picture you painted at the end of the need to move from being a string quartet into being a fully fledged orchestra. And I think there are many, many people who have been making this case for years and have seen small projects and tests and things that have worked, but have never quite managed to get national governments, international organizations behind the idea that this is now completely critical and has to become programmed. And perhaps that is a key part of the next phase of our discussion. Good morning, everyone. I am David Orr. I'm delighted to be one of the two co-chairs of this, I think, incredibly important project. We now have a question and answer session. The best way to post your questions is through the Q&A box that you can see on your screen. I will try to keep an eye on the chat box, but it is much easier if everyone uses the Q&A box. And for this Q&A session, we are being joined by Brian Evans, who's the city urbanist for Glasgow, one of my favorite job titles, and is also a professor at the Glasgow School of Art, and Martin van Rijn, who is the chair of ADES, the Dutch Federation of Housing Corporations. I will come to questions from participants in a moment, but just to get this conversation going, I wonder if I could ask, I'm going to ask all three this kind of scene setting question. When you think about the challenge that we face in decarbonizing our housing stock and improving the livability of our cities, are you optimistic? And I'm going to start with Brian, I think, since Glasgow is hosting, and I know Glasgow well. Everyone in Glasgow is always optimistic. Is that not the case, Brian?
Unmute yourself. Yeah, I don't think there's, well, for me, I mean, David, you know me, and I mean, I'm an optimist. There's no option really. I think Councillor Aitken this morning talked about the effort, the research effort that's going in through the University of Glasgow about retrofitting the older historic buildings in Glasgow. Holder explained that extremely well. I think we all need to, and I talked about this in my podcast, we need to find a way of explaining all of this in an accessible way to our people and working with our people to get them on side, and at the same time recognize the cost neutrality that Martin talked about for tenants, for example. So there's huge challenges here, but what's the option? I mean, you know, with the convergence of COVID and the climate emergency, we face existential challenges. So it's best to be hopeful, optimistic, and roll our sleeves up, share all the information that Holger was talking about. Actually, I listened back to the 3 podcasts last night from the panelists, and of course we all used the language typical to our roles, but there was remarkable consistency in what we were talking about organization, integration, and communication. So yeah, I'm optimistic, but at the same time, we all recognize what the challenges are. But hey, there's no point in doing this unless we set targets and we set challenges for ourselves. So,
indeed. Okay, thank you, Brian, and thanks for a bit of optimism to kick us off. I should have reminded everyone, of course, that we have 3 excellent podcasts on these issues from our panelists today. And if you've not yet had a chance to listen to them, you can find them on the Housing 2030 website. And they're well worth listening to. I'd like to move now to Martin. Martin, the same question about, given the scale of the challenge, how optimistic are you? But can I add something to this question? Wisdom Banda has asked, how can we improve community participation in collaboration with community partners to improve communities and improve housing stability? I think Holger referred to this in his presentation. How important is that sense of community engagement and tenant participation in the way that Dutch housing corporations are approaching this?
Oh, good morning, David. It always feels good to be among optimistic people. So it's, and I think in general, I'm an optimistic person myself. So in that case, I will also be optimistic on the big issue of this debate. I think it's a tremendous challenge, and but I think given the history of our social housing organization, it can be done. And if I look at the effort of social housing providers all over Europe, I think that most are already doing it. So I have some, still I have some pressing issues about the financial side of the transition. As we have discussed, our main mission remains offering affordable housing, affordable for the tenants, and that makes affordability of the tenants a key issue in this whole operation. I think social housing providers all over Europe and also in the Netherlands operate on the principle of cost neutrality for the tenants, and we made an agreement about that with the Dutch tenant organization that there should be cost neutrality, which is a huge task, because cost neutrality for the tenants does not mean that it is neutral for the social housing association. And we have some studies about this issue, and for now, investments in energy performance of buildings are not financially viable. So there must be, to have a success, we must ensure public funding for building renovations. We must ensure lower renovation costs by innovation and by industrialization in the construction sector. And also EU regulations should focus on the goals and not on the ways to reach that goals. And I think if cost neutrality for the tenant is a key issue, then talks with the tenants, negotiations with the tenants, setting goals with the tenants is a key issue for success. If you do this alone, it won't work.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Martin. And Holger, same question for you, although I think we got some indication of it from your presentation. But could you also address something that I know I've spoken of a lot in the past and many others have, that if we could turn these things into large-scale programs, the unit costs would diminish. Is there actually evidence to support that the more we do this, the cheaper it becomes and more effective our interventions might be?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me start also to just compliment and join the club of the positive people. This is actually, there's no alternative. And I even became more optimistic when listening last week to CNN and the outcome of the election in the US, to be honest. So there's even a little bit more hope. But your point is really good, David. And I think this is valid, and it has been shown that the colleagues in the Netherlands, TU Delft, had a fantastic program on prefab renovation facades, for instance, that bring down costs. So scalability is certainly a point, but also lessons learned. So what we have seen in a lot of projects is if you start the first time with a renovation project with a company that is not experienced, you pay a certain price. There's always a risk margin included. So if you replicate your good practices, you save money. And what we also do see is this is very tricky, and we have to work on it, I think. It's a phenomenon that I learned from the colleagues in UK, which is called white van man. So these very small renovation companies coming to the site, exploring and do it the first time. This is very, very challenging for us. The larger organization, very professional replication the work, I have less problems, do see less challenges than with the smaller SMEs, which are also the backbone of our societies. And this is really an economic transition that we also have, and a social transition that we have to work with. So the challenges are huge, but I was really excited to see so many initiatives and also learn in the course of the pandemic that I do not accept anymore the excuse that we do not have money to tackle the climate and social issue. The money is available. It's about our priorities. And this is exactly what we have learned in the last weeks.
Thank you. So there clearly is, we have discovered because of the pandemic that when governments need to find a lot of money quickly, they can do so. And there is an argument actually at a time where governments across the world, and certainly in the UNECE region, will be exploring ways of stimulating economic activity as economies are under huge pressure, that if we could grow this industry, it's actually a way of getting more and more people into skilled work in a relatively short period of time. So Brian, can I ask you, if that is indeed the case, to what extent, to pick up on one of the questions that we've had posted, to what extent do you think this has to be led by government, by local government, by regulation, by people being required to do it, to kickstart things, and then hoping that non-regulated policies and processes will then follow?
Thank you, David. I was sitting reflecting on that. I saw the question in the chat about regulation and non-regulation, and I think this is essential. To a certain degree, it's horses for courses. So we're talking about the greater Europe here, although we're today, of course, talking much wider than that across all of UNECE and beyond. About the different natures of challenges, and some countries have a much more free market approach to things, whereas other countries are more inclined to a coordinated and structured approach. So I think there's a role for both. At the end of the day, however, I think irrespective of the nature of the regime that exists in any particular country, there is a need for a degree of the old chestnut, carrot and stick. So I think that there needs to be, and this is perhaps more of the challenge in the United Kingdom, we need to find a coordinated way. And of course, as we both know, David, there's a radical difference in the four nations of the United Kingdom in terms of the way that we approach affordable housing. But I do think that there needs to be a consensus built. Holger was talking about that as well, and Martin. We need to build a consensus, and then we need a degree of regulation, which may vary from country to country. And we also need to incentivize as well. So I could see, for example, I remember the first regeneration of Glasgow's housing stock in the 1970s, where we stopped the modernist experiment and we began to recover and regenerate all of our Victorian stone-built tenemental properties. The roofs were improved. That was done through a grant scheme. If you have a fragmented private ownership of large sectors of a city, as opposed to a much more universal housing association ownership of large sectors of a city, the challenge becomes different. It's different, but it will involve both regulation and incentive and consensus. And I think that's the point, really. It's not that regulation is a silver bullet. It's more that we need to develop the right recipe for the country and its the fabric of the housing ownership pattern in order to be able to bring and land pan-European or indeed United Nations goals and objectives at the local level.
Okay, so this is a kind of critical issue. Holger talked about it. I don't want to stretch the orchestra analogy too far, but my old friend Corny Koppelar has asked a question in the Q&A about this, and how we ensure that national initiatives and international initiatives are working to the same point, that they are coordinated. You talked, Brian, about the need for there to be consensus. So I'm going to ask Martin, how do we ensure, as Corney put it in his question, how do we ensure that we have one conductor of this orchestra and that it's making beautiful music and not just a whole lot of rather difficult noises not being very well brought together?
Well, that's a very difficult question because it's a European music, so it's a large orchestra. But but maybe the question, maybe the answer is a bit more simple than we think, because if you would focus on the goals and the time within you want to reach that goals, you can give some room for innovation and for experiments and national history built expectations. I think if you say, well, there's not one road to the goal of less carbon, then you are able to set the goals and set the targets for in time and allow countries to meet those targets in their own way. So I think there are countries with a large social housing sector, there are countries with no social housing sector or a very small social housing sector, and it depends on what you do then. So I'm quite in favor of financial incentives and setting the goals very strictly in terms of time and in terms of the goals itself, and then let the countries decide what road to take, which could be more roads in the country as well. And
do you think that the UN has a role to play here as well as the EU, you know, to take it even beyond the scope that the EU and have some kind of, I suppose it's connected to the Sustainable Development Goals, isn't it? That what we're trying to do here is make a very, very compelling contribution to reducing climate change at the most macro level, but improving the quality of people's lives on a day-to-day basis at the most personal level. Is that, I mean, do you think that the global institutions have been pushing this enough?
Well, I think I think there's a general feeling that the overall climate goals are they are very good. I think there's an attitude for lots of people in Europe to stand behind these goals. But do you feel it as on a personal level? That's not a question, and that's why there should be room for countries to involve their own people in establishing this climate goals, because it's not far away from my bad problem. I think everybody could agree that, well, that we are worried about the climate change, and it's very good that the governments in Europe or the UN set global goals to counter that problem. But what are the consequences if you have to meet them yourself in your own house? So I think that's the key issue, that you couldn't agree on large goals and not looking at the consequences for yourself. So I think it's a huge challenge for national governments and housing associations as well to convince their tenants and their people that it is not a global goal and you have anything to do with it. You must make it a personal goal, I think.
So, Holger, do you think it is a legitimate criticism that we have looked at this from the wrong end of the telescope, that we've been focusing on, you know, 35% of CO2 emissions come from our residential buildings, and the planet is overheating. These are all important things, but they're distant to our day-to-day lives. Should we have been focusing much more on, this is fundamentally a program to make your home warmer, drier, cheaper to run?
Our terminology and communication and wording is key, how we sell really our ambitions. And I think this is exactly what you mentioned, David. We need to make it a personal thing to really move into action. I think this is very important, how we talk about the issues and selling also the advantages of renovation in terms of comfortable indoor environmental quality. And this is why we have let tenants talking after renovation, how they have experienced and what have been the good practices and the lessons learned. I think this is a very strong instrument that we have to use. But maybe to add to Martin about one thing that we have experienced it's good to look at the UN level, and I think last week at the World Sustainable Built Environment Conference, we introduced the need of a transformational plan for the built environment on a regional level. We do not have it, actually. There is no action agenda how to transform the built environment in UK, in Scandinavia, in Southern Europe. We do not have it. We have different goals, but they are not really playing together, and we have no action agenda towards 2030 that is really coming, as Martin said, from the ground. This is one thing that is really, really missing. And I think the UN has to play a role here and to allow also to make regional differences and maybe prioritize some goals higher than others, because they are more important in one region than in the other. This is one thing. And the second thing is what we have experienced. We have to start on a municipality level. What we do see is we have silo thinking and treating of goals. We have an energy department, we have a landscape department or urban planning department. And what we experience in some projects when we force the different divisions within the municipality to work together towards a goal, not in series, but together, then you can come up with holistic solutions and do not really treat it as one department after the other, focusing on CO2, and then you are figuring out, now we have another issue here on urban planning, for instance, or historic buildings have been neglected, just been put with the requirement to renovate them, which is not possible sometimes. So holistic solutions require also reorganization on municipality organization and work, actually.
So in that case, let's go to our resident urbanist and representative of a major municipality. Brian, is that fair? Do you think Glasgow is doing a good job there that could be replicated by others? And Barbara Steenbergen has asked that, or has noted that Scotland has banned the renting out of the worst performing, most energy inefficient buildings. Has that worked? And is it a model for others to copy?
Well, while I think up an answer to the last question, the honest one is I don't know actually, but could I make an observation as a way into this, David? When like everybody else, I was sat at home, well, at least in our country in May, pondering the whole new way of working and things. I was reflecting and reading, and some of the texts I read were from psychologists and behavioral psychologists talking about people being hardwired to deal with immediate threats. It's in the DNA of the human species, if you like, and much less effective in terms of dealing with things that are further away, that could be a threat. And it seems to me that this is one of the issues that we face in dealing with post-pandemic matters and dealing with the climate emergency matters as well. I think it was Martin who said, used a terminology like some of these global goals and things, they're a long way from my bed or my home, you know? And I think that coupled with Holger's point about communication is essential. So I started talking about this as well at a municipality level, about saying, because we were facing a lot of challenges about the reconfiguration of public space, for example, to make it safe for physical distancing. By the way, I always say physical distancing for social cohesion. I refuse to use the term social distancing. What we are trying to do is safe distancing to ensure social cohesion. But be that as it may, I said, listen, we cannot, to our city's leadership, we can't have continual streams of people in high-vis jackets of a completely technicolor hue arriving in neighborhoods to say, oh, well, we're here to introduce, we're digging up the street because we're going to install a whole series of electric charging points. And then a few weeks later, another bunch of people in a different color high-vis jacket say, well, we're the house insulation boys. We're going to, you know, we need to find a way. And it's why I think I'm delighted that the walkable neighborhood, the 20-minute neighborhood, call it what you want to happen. I've got Jeff Speck's book sitting on my desk here, you know, The Walkable City, that's thinking about having access to local goods and services for daily needs within a 20-minute radius could be the key into integrating a number of these different challenges and getting us out of the silos for dealing with, for example, reconfiguration of public space for safe movement, for walking, cycling and wheeling, could be the way to also look at the retrofitting of buildings. And therefore, I do think that it comes down to communication, taking all of these clever, desirable goals and aims that we all stand up behind, but deconstructing those for local people about their lives, their health, the lives and health of their children and grandchildren, and combining the effect. You know, in my podcast, I talked about the cocktail of change that cities face, being demographic, being climate change, being technological, and into the demographic, we've now got this time bomb of health as well. So I really think that I appreciate that it's a wordy answer, but your question to me about the municipality level is finding a language to integrate all of these things and to integrate all of these things for people in their neighborhood, where behind it all, there is very clever vertical thinking and integration that integrates the sustainable development goals from the international level through the government level, whether that is a federal government or a devolved government or whatever, through to the municipality and the people on the ground, make it pertinent to their lives and improve the quality of their life, the quality of their place, with very clear objectives, as I believe Martin said, very clear regulation, and then find a way to do that to get this optimistic group of people, as you say, in a city like Glasgow, behind you in saying, oh yeah, I mean, this is about our lives, our children's lives, and the future of the planet. And, you know, I mean, I'll stop at that point, but I'm really passionate about this need for integration, because people don't think about their house, the street outside, and the local park in different containers. They think about their place, and therefore integrating that in a way to stop this technicolor array of high-vis jackets coming to do things to people, I think is incredibly important.
Okay, so I think that those of us who are involved in this 2030 study would be very interested in hearing, not necessarily right now, but from participants, if you think that you can identify really good examples of where that's happened, where, you know, the proper engagement of the community in the decision-making process has really worked and has helped to make a substantial difference. Because what I think we want to do with this whole study is to be able to provide examples of where things have worked, where it's demonstrated that, you know, it is possible to make a really significant and important change. You know, systems that have worked. I mean, you know, this challenge of ensuring that there is policy and political coordination and a clear framework then for local delivery. I'm going to ask Martin, do you think that that is something that has worked in the Netherlands? And I mean, should we be using the way that you and your housing associations have approached this as an example of good practice that could be copied by others?
Well, I think, first of all, I think we have to get used to the fact that sustainable development and sustainable development in the housing sector, let me phrase it a bit simply, should not be a political issue. Because if you think it's a political issue, you say, well, maybe a year after this, it could change, or a different kind of. And if it's not a political issue, but a long-term issue which everyone has to cope with, then you could plan your own behavior. maybe a good example if it is for in our neighborhood where I live in a house which was built in 1901. So it's a very old, beautiful house, but very difficult to have investments on in this field. And what worked was that the community in the neighborhood, together with the local government, gave a leaflet to all the tenants and all the homeowners in this area and say, well, we go to sustainable development in your area. We know it's very difficult. We want to talk with you about ideas, how we can do that, what the involvement is for housing association, what the involvement is for homeowners. Let's sit together and talk about how we're going to do it for the next 5 or 10 years. And then you're going to think yourself, you say, well, I was planning a renewal of my dwelling in about 3 years. I can cope with the new goals which are set. So it's not an involvement in sale. You can say also something about the plans, but you can talk with the tenants and the homeowners about, we're going to do this anyway. Can we help you in establishing what is your path, what is your timetable, what is your behavior in the next few years? So you have some time to adapt. And I think if you come to the tenants and say, well, we need a sustainable development and you're living in the dwelling of us, and in 2 years' time, we're going to enter your home and going to rebuild it. I think that's not a very popular issue. But if you talk with the tenants and say, well, we know that you have, this is the target we're going to meet. You can't get away from them, but we can talk with you about how can we help you to establish your own goals. And I think there are some, if you have this mix of national and international set goals and local implementation together with tenants and homeowners, then you have another issue, I think. And there are
have you been able to do this in a way which has been affordable for the tenants and for the homeowners?
Yeah, well, that's when I used my optimistic view about can we do this, I think we can do this, but this is the main issue, I think. This is the main issue. And the fact that we have housing associations, social housing associations, social institutions, we think about, well, we can do this, but we have to keep it affordable for the tenants. That helps because there's organizational power and innovation power. But without public funding, without filling the gap, it won't work. So we really need it. On the other hand, times are changing. To cope with economic problems evolving from the COVID crisis, we need to invest because we need to invest to get out of the economic problem. So this moment in time is also a much more chance to make it work. But affordability for the tenants is a real big issue. It cannot be solved without public funding.
It's interesting. In the UK, we've had various attempts at a Green Deal. And for most homeowners in particular, it has foundered on the fact that the cost of money, the loans, were too expensive. So it made the whole process unaffordable and didn't deliver what the proponents argued could be delivered. So one of the questions that we've had is about the role of the banks here. I'm going to ask Holger, from the kind of study that you've carried out, the work that you've done, can you see any evidence that there are some banks that you would say, yeah, they've done this well. They've been really genuinely supportive of this agenda, and that we could point to those and say, we could replicate this elsewhere?
Absolutely, and I think it fits very well also to Julie's question, why some countries are really successful, like Denmark or Slovakia or Austria has been mentioned actually. So there are two things. First, there are banks that really work on affordable loans. The European Investment Bank is working in this direction. The KfW in Germany, for instance, is moving in this direction. We have seen also other banks in other countries doing this. So there is certainly lessons learned. And what they did is actually, they worked over the market mechanisms. And this is the major problem that we have nowadays, that it's very attractive to invest in real estates. The prices went up, and it's more attractive to invest in buildings and real estates than in any other parts where you can make money. And this has led to the situation, and this is, I think, also one of the success stories in these countries that Julie mentioned in her quote, that they also introduced a cap of rent increase and they chipped in money to really overcome the pure market mechanism to make as much money as possible with real estates. And we see it everywhere. We are suffering. Our students do not get any apartments within the cities anymore. They cannot afford it. Yeah, and even for us at the university, we cannot afford any laboratories, and we are pushed out of our premises more or less because we cannot afford the market rents in our premises. And this is awkward, that the money that I'm bringing in for research is half of it dedicated to pay our rents, and this is not okay. So we have to rework really also our taxation system, how we really tax also land and properties. And I think this is a major issue that we have to work on. Maybe this in the pandemic, exactly as Martin said, we have to bring work back to the people. We have to rework our tax system on labor costs, on natural resource costs, and on land costs. And we have to find a different model that allows us to renovate the existing building stock, to tackle our challenges and make our buildings, houses affordable again in the future. This is really key.
I mean, these are, of course, huge structural questions. In a way, I suppose I'm reassured that our study is looking at the right things. We are looking at land because the relationship that we have with land and the price of land is so fundamental to our ability to make the kinds of changes that we need to make. And we're looking at governance and different kinds of systems and structures and what works best. And, you know, when everything is market driven, the need to drive profit takes precedence over all else. So what other systems, housing associations, cooperatives, social enterprises, different ways of looking at how we do this. So we're looking at that. And of course, we're looking at funding and finance. And you know, you've suggested it needs to be a combination of our financial institutions and of government, and some sponsorship, some grant funding, some cheap loans. So, you know, these are all huge issues that will be part of the study. We're getting towards the end of the time that we've got available for this conversation. So I want to bring it, well, first of all, can I say there's a huge amount of really useful information being posted on both the Q&A and the chat. Keep doing that, please. We can capture all of that. And I think I'm right in saying that we will be able to share some of the links and some of the suggestions that are being made there after the event. It's not just during this conversation. So keep doing that, because there is some really important stuff there. But I want to come back to something more immediate, really. The last year and the COVID pandemic has meant that we've all had to reassess pretty fundamentally the relationship that we have with our homes. How much do you think, let's start with you, Brian, how much do you think COVID will be a driver for the kind of significant systemic change that we need? And how much do you think it will help us to concentrate on the need to make this properly affordable for people?
It's one of the big questions of the day, David, I think. And to a certain degree, I think this depends on leadership. I mean, if you take the point that Martin was making just a few moments ago about the opportunity that's presented to us just now, the Build Back Better proposition, for example, and the other point that's come through the discussion and in Holger's presentation about the lack of skills. And I know that's clear here in Glasgow, for example, that I know my colleagues who are leading the housing initiatives here in Glasgow face the challenge of, the white van man if you like, Holger, but I mean, it's even larger than that. So there's a massive opportunity right now to put a considerable investment that we would be putting into economic recovery to make sure that there is an overlap between the effort that we make in economic recovery and in reskilling and in the technological change that we need to put together. We must bring these things together. We have a golden opportunity to reskill, but to do that, that is going to need not only leadership, but courage from politicians to say, listen, we cannot drift back to where we were before. We are in a new place, and there is plenty of evidence. I think it's largely anecdotal, but the studies are starting to come through that on one hand, people are tired of working from the kitchen table. They don't all have the luxury that I've got to have a dedicated room to this, for example. They're tired of that, but at the same time, they don't want to go back to where they were. This requires what I was talking about earlier on in these conversations, the ability to express all of this in very clear ways related to the way we live, our health, the integrated nature of our place, the future of our children and our grandchildren. And it's going to take some, after all, if I mean, one only knows about it perhaps in detail in one's own country. But if you think about the countless billions that the British Chancellor has been able to find to support through furlough people who are not able to work, there's a massive opportunity right now to look at reskilling, to refocus our economic recovery on some of the central propositions that we've been talking about this morning. And to do that, I think it all boils down at the end of the day with the ability to engage with people and carry them with us in the way to take that forward.
So that's a great call to action, Brian.
Yep.
And we've really only got 2 minutes left. I just want to say that the session after Frans Timmerman will be about looking at some specific examples where we think that good tools have been put in place, where we can demonstrate the mechanisms. And we're going to run a poll in a moment. I just want to wrap up this part of today's webinar by saying that, well, first of all, I think that the contributions from Martin, Brian, and Holger have been absolutely fantastic. And I think those contributions have been driven by really interesting, thoughtful, penetrating questions. I'm deeply sorry that I've not managed to get to nearly enough of the questions that have been posted on the Q&A. And some of the comments and links and ideas that are coming through the chat line. And where this has taken me, I am as one of the co-chairs, very aware of the kind of enormity of the challenge. But what I think right now is that there is so much dynamism, so much enthusiasm, so many good ideas, so much work that's already been done and is evidenced just in the kind of 150, 160 of us who are involved in this conversation, which I know can be made much bigger all around, well, Europe, the UNECE region, around the world. There is potential here. There is, as we have discovered, money available. We think, all of us, that this is perhaps a moment, an issue whose time has come, where we have understood that there are very few things that we can do which make such a profound difference to individuals in their homes at a stage of a global pandemic, but which also have the potential to contribute to saving the planet. And this has to be something that we take, run with, and really make it a key part of the recovery the world economic recovery as well as health recovery over the next few years. So many thanks indeed to our three panelists. I think that was absolutely brilliant. And just before we stop for our digital coffee break, I'm personally going to be having real coffee, not digital coffee. But just before we stop for that, I'm going to pass over to Diana Jordanova, who's going to present a quick poll for all of us to have a look at.
Yes, thank you, David. Great discussion, I must say. Really a lot of questions and answers in the chat area. But I have to say that now we have exactly actually 150 people. At some point we had 160 people. And given that we had to be in Glasgow today, we thought that that could be a great opportunity to kind of see what our audience thinks about some of the key questions that we have been discussing today. So if I kick off with the first one, we have just a couple. That is, first, let me just tell you to go to menti.com. That is the tool that we are using. You can use it with any device, so that could be a mobile phone, a tablet, a computer. And then the code here, I see some people are already pretty fast, but let me, yeah, you can of course go ahead. But the code is 255147.6. And we are asking, do you think your country is making sufficient progress in decarbonizing its housing stock? Three questions. Of course, it's never black or white, but it's hard to put that together with so much people. So yes, no, or not sure. Okay. So we'll give it a couple of seconds, maybe a minute, for people to vote. You see that this is changing by the second. We have around 25 people for the moment. Although we have clearly one of the answers in a way leading here. Okay. Maybe some people are logging in. All right, let's say we give it another couple of 10-15 seconds for people to vote. Wow, okay. So we have 34 for the moment saying, well, my country, my government could do more on improving the housing stock, and then the number is, yeah, it's increasing. Then we have 6 people who are in a way in between, they're not sure. And we have 3 clear optimists, if I can say so, saying, yes, I think that my country and my government are on the right track. Okay, so let's see whether we can make it to 50 people at least. And then maybe that could be a good warm-up for the next question. Okay. 49. 50. Okay. As we have a little bit of time, so if we can go to the next question. It looks a little bit more different in a way to vote. So here we have a scale, and then I'll explain to you how it works. So basically the line that is on the left stays for 0. So I'll first read the question and then guide you through that. Which of the following actors has the most important role to play in decarbonizing the housing stock? Okay, so on the left, we have, I don't think that this actor has any role to play. And on the right, we give a 10 saying, yes, it has a crucial role to play. And of course, anything in between from 0 to 10. We also added one kind of open answer, which says other. And then for that, you're welcome also to share with the others which organization do you think of when you say other. So we have, in a way, national governments and regional local governments being pretty close, followed very, very closely by the construction sector and individual homeowners, as well international organizations. Here we have mentioned just the UN, the EU, and OECD, but of course the list is long. And other, for people who have more suggestions, happy to hear. Okay. We have again 49 people. Let's say, can we make it to 50 again? Yes, perfect. Okay, we will keep it, of course, and we'll share the conclusions later. But before that, a last question that takes a little bit more time. So we will allow it. We will allow you also to vote for that and then to express your ideas during the coffee break. It's a word cloud, and here we are aiming at having names of initiatives which are helping to decarbonize the housing stock in your country or elsewhere. You're allowed to Google it, so that's why we want to allow also some time while we are preparing for the next session. So here we will already have Open Gala. This is an EU-funded project that Housing Europe is also part of. But I don't want to also take too much from your time. As I said, this slide will be open. Please enjoy and be on time in around 10 minutes at 11 a.m. UK time or 12 a.m. Central European time, when we'll welcome Vice President Frans Timmermans. Enjoy.
Elena, what we can do is move to the other speakers we have lined up, the quick kind of examples of best practice. And if needed, maybe you can interrupt that for Timmermans if you get him on the line, but maybe we can move quickly to the other speakers you have lined up for this session.
Thank you very much, Dara. Dear invisible participants, dear friends of affordable housing. We really hope to have Mr. Timmermans with us and to hear his message about the coming wave of reconstruction in Europe. We hope that we will have the opportunity to hear a little bit later on. But so let's move to our agenda for today. And this is the question: how can we make the necessary environmental sustainability and livability upgrades to housing stock without increasing costs for low and moderate income households? This is $1 million question, and translating in the normal human life, it is how we can make our homes really safe and healthy and cozy without destroying our households' budgets. And we will have a couple of representatives of national, local governments and social and affordable housing providers and policy experts who will share the experiences with housing policies which address the climate challenge in a way that is affordable, equitable, and sustainable for households. So we shall start with Björn Malland, who comes from the Association of Flemish Social Housing Companies, VVH, in Flanders, and he will speak about something, the Aster initiative, and we will learn what is hidden under the Aster initiative. So Björn, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot for the introduction. So let me try to give you in a very short period some information about the Aster project. Aster is a special purpose vehicle and it's owned, set up by the social housing companies in Flanders. About 85% of the housing companies are founding partners of Aster. And the special purpose vehicle, when I explain what Aster stands for, it will be quite clear what we are doing. It's access to sustainability for tenants, social tenants, through energy efficient retrofit. So what we try to do is to make social housing, existing social housing, more sustainable and heightening the energy efficiency. And we're doing that by using solar panels. Why did we choose solar panels? Because it's in sustainability, it's one of the techniques that at this moment is quite mature. We can calculate quite good what the impact is, what the cost is. So this is the best thing that we could find to scale up on a large scale in social housing in Flanders to give our tenants quite a big reduction on the energy bill. What's important is that what we're doing with Aster, it's additional. So it's a vehicle that's financed by the private market, by banks. So it's next to government subsidies or government investment. So it's off balance. It's out of the public debt, which makes it, of course, quite interesting for the government and also for us. So how do we finance Aster? As I said, we have been talking with banks for quite some time because it's a private initiative, so there is some risk involved. And we do that by just getting loans from private investment banks for a total of 230 million euros in solar panels, additional to the normal government-backed subsidies and in more and better social housing in Flanders. And I think it's very important to see this additional possibilities that we can use in sustainability solutions. How do we do that? With a split incentive model. So we get some return on what the tenant is saving on his energy bill, and a part of that saving is used with a monthly fee to pay for the investment in the solar panels. There is, of course, the guarantee that no tenants will ever pay more than the black on white saving that he can see on his energy bill. Just to give you an idea of the project, which is an ELENA-backed project. So the ELENA project from the EIB, the European Commission, has given us technical assistance to set this up. And it's mainly technical assistance to work out the financial scheme. And the potential at this moment is that we will provide solar energy in the next 3 years in Flanders for 90,000 families, which is more or less 2/3 of the social housing stock in Flanders. And in ways of decarbonizing, it will have the same effect as planting 1.5 million trees, which is more or less 4,500 football fields in trees that we can save in carbon expenditure. So I think it's an interesting project because it's additional to the normal subsidized government spending, and also it shows that you can set up business models based on what tenants are saving and use that to do additional investments in sustainability and scale it up as social housing companies, because that's of course the interesting aspect, that we can do this on a large scale and that we see that most of our members are also on board at this moment, and every day new are coming in. So I think that's a very promising project, and it was very nice to be able to present that to you on a very short period. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Björn, for this inspiring and innovative approach. And it is really interesting to see that it's also the private sector who can become the relevant partner in making this savings in social housing. This is really very inspiring. The next one is Anu Sarnet. He comes from Estonian Union of Cooperative Housing Associations from Tokyo. And she will speak about, to me, very understandable, very big challenge in our countries, which is affordable renovation of communist-era apartment buildings. Anu, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So good afternoon from Tallinn. I'm very pleased to be here today and share with you a new technological solution and new renovation policies that Estonia has developed to support cost-effective refurbishment of multi-apartment building stock. So today, more than 70% of the Estonian population is living in apartment building, from which the majority is heritage from the Soviet era. These are standard buildings, blocks of flats, not sustainably renovated. And it's estimated that there are 14,000 apartment buildings needing renovation today in Estonia. So Estonia's new long-term renovation strategy addresses the challenge with rather ambitious targets, aiming to renovate by 2050 all the housing stock built before year 2000. And for that, different measures are foreseen, but it actually means we need to increase renovation volume. And for achieving our targets on sustainable and affordable housing stock and our targets on renovation wave, we need innovation and technological solutions to accelerate the process and to reduce the cost of renovation. And based on the real need, a new technological solution for renovation of apartment buildings together with a new renovation policy has been developed in Estonia, namely renovation with prefabricated elements. This is based on the principles that buildings prefabricated on the basis of standard projects would also be renovated using standard solutions. Can I ask next slide, please? This renovation strategy is developed for the Estonian housing stock by TalTech, Tallinn University of Technology, and it allows very fast renovation of Soviet-era apartment buildings made from bricks or concrete panels. Basically, the wall elements with windows and ventilation system will be manufactured at the plant and only installed on site. So the renovation of one apartment building should take no more than 1 month, which is significantly faster than usual building renovation process in Estonia. And as mentioned, this type of renovation is supported by national policy and regulation. And we're very happy that since the beginning of this November, the reconstruction grant in the extent of 50% is available for apartment associations in Estonia who decide to renovate using these innovative solutions. So what results we can expect? Next slide, please. Today, the process is based on a test house and best practice building and active product development of prefabricated elements. So approximately 20 apartment buildings will be renovated next year using this technology and using reconstruction grant. And after that, Estonia expects the volumes of renovation to grow. And as I mentioned before, that by 2050, 100% of buildings built before 2000 should be renovated according to the strategy. This type of technological solutions should play an important role in this process. And when we think that this type of Soviet-era housing stock exists in many other European countries as well, there is a great potential in it. The solution can be applicable also to wider region, not only in Estonia. So we are just in the beginning of the journey with this type of renovation, but it seems to be very exciting journey because we hope that this type of innovation allows us to reduce the cost of construction and making renovation more affordable, accelerating the renovation process and making it less inconvenient for residents who are living in the building during the renovation process in Estonia. And this type of innovation and with the help of research and development in the renovation process, we can actually improve our chances to achieve our goals for sustainable and affordable housing and catch the aims of the renovation wave. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Anu. This was very inspiring again case, which actually illustrates what Holger was describing in his abstract introduction. This is the case where the industrialization and these panel systems can help to speed up the technological progress of the renovation and maybe also decrease the total costs. So let's hope that this is a huge success which can be then followed by other countries with the same situation. Thank you very much. Now we will move from the north, from Estonia to Portugal, and we will hear from Adoni Hidalgo, who comes from OpenGela, to speak about the one-stop shop for neighborhood level renovation homes. And we will also hear what the OpenGela is for, because it is a broader project than only the project on renovation of homes. Andoni, the floor is yours.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Well, first of all, it's not Portugal, it's Spain, it's the Basque region in Spain, but in any case, it's a southern country, you're right. Thank you very much for the invitation to share our project. I enjoyed very much the first part of this meeting this morning. And by the way, congratulations on the image that you have chosen for the Housing 2030 project. This Rubik cube. It's quite inspiring because it implies that this is a multifaceted problem, and until you solve all sides and all facets of a problem, you have not solved it all. So it's a very graphic image that is very close to the truth. And this is exactly the approach that we are taking in the Open Gela project, which is funded by the European Commission under the Horizon 2020 program. It's the establishment of district-based one-stop shops. What do we mean by that? One-stop shops to us in our project are physical offices that have been opened in the neighborhoods that are being refurbished in order to provide assistance to neighbors, to be close to them, to build trust with them, and to provide them assistance from the start of the renovation process until the end. All through the journey, they are assisted by these physical open offices. Okay, so the innovative approach is not just this fact of having these district offices, it's as well the fact that this is being supported by very strong regional policies. In the aspect that has been mentioned this morning by other speakers, we have a very strong 2030 agenda at regional level based on the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is a way to develop the urban agenda that we have developed and approved, that the Basque government has developed and approved last year. And this is a way to bring SDGs down to reality and to really show how the SDG 11, but not only, it's multifacets, as we have said, it can be brought to reality in real projects and in real benefits for the citizens. So this is it. First, umbrella strategies, very solid, and then these are the top-down strategies, but combined with bottom-up initiatives like this one of the one-stop shops. What do we do in these one-stop shops? We have 3 people employed by each office, providing all kind of advice, from technical advice on the kind of renovations that will be done in the building blocks, as the ones that you see in the pictures, as well advice on social matters. This is these building blocks are a combination of social housing, but as well there are some blocks that are privately owned. So we provide as well advice on social matters. We have administrative staff as well, taking care of the administrative burden of these projects to be brought forward, advice in legal matters, and of course, advice on financial issues. Next slide, please. So this is a fund that is provided by the regional government, covering obviously starting by vulnerable neighborhoods. These are the ones that we are addressing first place, and these are the ones in which these open district offices have been opened. And the subsidies provided by the regional government are increasing, related to the economic situation of the neighbors, but as well, of course, an upfront investment needs to be made. And for that, we are implementing in this Open Gela project an innovative financial approach, taken from another broader project being developed, the Europace project, which is based on a model of tax on financing for building renovation. But as you see in here, energy efficiency is part of, is one of the elements, but it's not it all. We are very much aware that the trigger to foster building renovation is not just energy efficiency. It's almost never energy efficiency, but I mean, it comes together with some other aspects such as improvement in accessibility, improvements on comfort, health, etc., etc. These all elements take part of the puzzle, and it's part of the convincing work that we have to do with the neighbors in order to to undertake these renovation activities. And another important element as well, that this is a process that it's just kick-starting. The project started last year, and it started in 2 pilot projects, as I have stated, one in Bilbao and another one in Eibar, another town nearby. And it intends to be replicated massively all through the first region, and then hopefully with other parts of Europe will be inspired by our experience. I will not finalize with them before saying that, I mean, obviously we had this pandemic coming in 2020 with all its difficult implications. Obviously, these open offices are open yet again, but we have to gather people in small groups. We have to adapt to the new circumstances, but as well, new proposals are coming over. We are able to convince citizens to refurbish their apartments, not just for energetic reasons, not just for accessibility, but as well, for instance, we are developing some other new solutions, such as extension and providing with balconies, in times of confinement, have proved to be really a good asset for apartments. And this is to say that as well, 2020 has come forward with some good news as well, such as the renovation wave, which we very much hope will be a trigger in order to foster and to replicate these building renovation and neighborhood regeneration activities. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much, Andoni. Well, I do believe that this neighborhood approach, these one-stop shops, is really the way how to communicate with people. We have heard this morning a lot of stress put on the importance of communicating with people and speaking their language, a simple language which really goes to their heart and to their understanding. And by that also bringing the more complex approaches to front. Now, I'd like to give the floor to Peter Gergely, who is my countryman, who comes from the Slovakian Ministry of Transport and Construction. And he will be speaking about the successful Slovakian scheme to renovate and modernize the existing housing stock, which is comparable with Estonians, but with longer term standing. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So I would like to talk how we made affordable modernization of housing stock possible in Slovakia. The massive privatization of to sitting tenants in the 90s has literally wiped out the rental housing stock. Now, from the total number of all dwellings, more than 93% of are owner occupied. Only 3 to 4% are in public ownership. The multi-apartment building stock was in time of privatization in poor physical state and in need urgent general repair. We made, or in Slovakia, we made after that an assessment and evaluation of the requirements for rehabilitation and energy efficiency improvement of all the multi-apartment buildings by survey. And in 1998, we prepared an inventory of all the multi-apartment buildings in terms of age, size, type of consumption, construction, technical conditions, and also the expected cost for general repair and energy efficiency improvement. The new owners of those multi-apartment buildings were not prepared for the new responsibilities and usually not aware of hidden debt in neglected maintenance. Housing management companies also didn't have active approach to the renovation. And the financing sector was also not able to provide great or possibilities for renovation because interest rates were high and long-term loans were not available at the time. That's why 2 financial instruments were introduced by state. First was a subsidy scheme in 1998. One of the supported activities was subsidy for the elimination of systematic failures in multi-apartment buildings. Those are the failures which have not been caused by the neglected maintenance or repairs, but by the construction technology used. Another instrument was a loan program funded by the State Housing and Development Fund. It was a program for the renewal of multi-apartment buildings older than 10 years. It started in 1999. The renewal of multi-apartment buildings means the simultaneous reconstruction, thermal insulation, and the elimination of systematic failures. Within this program, it has been possible to obtain very affordable loan with a sub-market interest rate and with repayment period up to 25 years. The loan could be around 80 to 100% of the costs. These described instruments with some changes exist still till today. At the beginning, it was the high subsidy for limited type of systematic interventions that motivated the owners to refurbishment. But over time, subsidy decreased as well and was substituted by favorable loans for more purposes, enabling for the deeper reconstruction and renewal. Of course, the regulation of energy prices led to the changes of owners' considerations of possible renewal activities. During the last 2 decades, public funds have helped to refurbish in a complex way significant part of housing stock, as you can see on the graph. Condominiums with more than 300,000 housing units benefited from a favorable loan from State Housing Development Fund, and more than 150,000 from a subsidy provided by the Ministry of Transport and Construction. Over time, the State Housing Development Fund has become self-sufficient, and since 2013 attracted EU structural funds and thus has progressively reduced the contribution of the state budget to housing. Stability of available state support speeded up deep refurbishment of existing housing stock. In combination with own resources of condominiums owners and with support of building saving loans and other commercial loans, Slovakia can today report over 60% of renewed housing stock in multi-apartment buildings. So in summary, today's success was able mainly by these activities. At the beginning, there was a legal framework for condominiums, which means there was obligation to have a homeowner association or professional management in multi-apartment buildings. Also, there was obligation to pay to the fund for maintenance and repair. And this fund can be next used as a guarantee for loans. Most important, however, was stability of the legal and financial framework, which is now for 20 years. So that's what we did in Slovakia. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Peter, for this description. Your illustration or our illustration actually shows how complex the issue is. It's about the communication with the people concerned. It is about the technical solution. It's about the knowledge and combination of this. It is about long-term financing. And we, with 60% in 20 years, are still not at the end of the road. So it is really the challenge of the long run. And now we will move to Monica Scatasta, and she comes from the Council of Europe Development Bank, and she will speak about the financing schemes for accessible renovation of low-income housing. The Council of Europe Development Bank is known for its socially oriented lending, so let's hear about the possibilities there. Monica, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for inviting CB. And indeed, unfortunately, I instead could not assist to the first half of the event today due to other engagements. And so let me start by commending the Commission for the package that was issued on the 14th of October, and for the clear indication both of the potential for energy efficiency renovation of buildings, and also the recognition that such ambitious renovation programs can have in contributing to reducing social inequalities. And we'll discuss that a little bit later on, but also for the clear focus on addressing barriers to increase investment in renovation. And it was very interesting to hear the speakers just now talk about some of the solutions, including, for instance, the Basque Region's neighborhood one-stop shop approach, which addresses a number of the barriers that are identified in the Commission's documentation. And also what's interesting in those documents is the call for a more integrated use of different sources and different forms of financing, and that's what I'm going to focus on today. You see in this slide a map of CB's support for social and affordable housing at the moment. What we have under implementation at the moment is investment for about double the amount of our financing, the amount of our financing being 3.6 billion euros for both new housing and renovation, with renovation representing about a third of that amount, and possibly a little bit more in terms of the share of investment. Now, what's interesting, what I would like us to do is to put the focus that we've had on renovation, and on renovation also as an instrument to address energy poverty, into the broader context also of the current situation of growing housing poverty in general across Europe, and the existing and also growing disparities and inequalities in access to housing and in access to quality dwellings. COVID clearly has put a very strong spotlight on these disparities, and also is leading us to a different use in the different way in which we use our homes. And this is having also in turn impacts. We are seeing impacts on increased energy poverty, with examples of households that are now no longer able to meet the energy costs due to the new ways and the prolongation of the hours that they spend at home. And another aspect that I wanted to put the focus on is the other element that is linked with climate action, with climate change, when we think about renovation of housing, and therefore the importance of having also an integrated approach to renovations. I mean, I'm thinking about the disparities, increasing disparities in terms of having access to dwellings that are also adapted to future climate impacts and the ongoing gentrification, climate gentrification processes that we see in a number of European cities. I think that it's important to take really an integrated approach, and this is what CB does when looking at projects both in terms of new buildings and old build and renovation. Can we stay on the previous slide, please? Thank you. What I would like to give you is just a flavor also of what CB does more generally as Europe's Social Development Bank, the oldest MDB in Europe, founded back in 1956. From the very first year, it's the very first housing project was aimed at promoting home ownership for refugees in Greece, and since then about 20% of our lending has gone for social and affordable housing. And what's important here is that the CEP can finance, and this is not the case for all MDBs, both projects for rental units and projects for housing ownership, particularly for the most vulnerable. And this is really the focus and the nature of the CB, focusing on the most vulnerable. Clearly, the makeup of the most vulnerable also with COVID-19 and its aftermath is evolving. Now, the range of instruments that the CB uses is vast, but it's important to stress, and here I want to link back what I was saying at the beginning about the importance of looking at how to integrate different sources and forms of financing. CB finances and provides financing mainly for public counterparts at both sovereign and sub-sovereign level, and also for financial intermediaries, but not for private companies. So for instance, where others can finance ESCOs, we cannot. But it's important then to think of how to integrate all sources of funding and instruments that are available, and what's the role therefore for a public or for a bank that focusing on public investment. Now, on the range of instruments, we go, as I said, loans to sovereign, sub-sovereign, intermediated financing, 0% interest rate loans, the blending of grants and loans, and also the managing of grants directly, particularly though outside Europe, in some cases. Another instruments that clearly we use is microfinance, also to support also access to credit for housing for most vulnerable population, and clearly the provision of technical assistance, but also the work with others who are providing technical assistance, as for instance, the work with Elena, for instance, currently in a project in the Netherlands. One final point before we go to the briefly two case studies is the importance in our projects of the support for energy audits and the requirement therefore for energy audits both before and after the intervention, so that we can clearly report on indicators and we use building energy ratings and report them for all our projects. So now next slide, I want to give you just a couple of examples, one in Belgium, where I wanted to give you an example of a project where we focus really on vulnerable households. And here the work initiated under the Belgian Housing for All plan, we've been working with the Fonds du Logement des Familles Nombreuses de Wallonie, so the housing funds for numerous families, for large families in Wallonie. As part of this, what is interesting is that as part of the panoply of mortgages that were provided to different types of housing with fixed rates that changed according to the nature of the household, but also the nature of the area where the dwelling was located. As part of this, the fund also offered large families access to interest-free credit for a maximum of 10 years to cover work on existing family homes and make them more energy efficient. These were called éco-prêts or green loans for a maximum amount of 30,000 euros. And applicants, depending on their level of income, could also obtain bonuses of up to 1,000 euros if, as I said, their incomes were below a certain levels, to be used in part to start repaying these interest-free credits. Now, the important part, again, the important element in this project was, again, the energy audit, the assessment, therefore, of before and after energy consumption, which needed to then be certified by a qualified engineer or a government-approved thermal efficiency assessment. This is very important in terms of the credibility of the impact of the project. And what's also, I mean, I wanted to give you an example of another project also in Belgium, very briefly, where we worked, it's again in Wallonie. We had an example from Flanders earlier, but with Société Wallonne du Logement, where again, based on very transparent pre-selection criteria and based on energy audit, there was support that was provided to households for covering a minimum of 60% of the total cost of renovation, which was supposed to be directed to energy efficiency measures. And in this other project, which in fact was based on 2 loans supporting investment from 2010 and again in 2017, we've seen really significant greenhouse gas emission reductions of about 28,000 tons of CO2 per year. Again, another projects where we've supported about 4,000 vulnerable households, and of which 30% headed by single parents and 15% living under the poverty line. So quite important impacts. Now, another example, if we will go to the next slide, is the example of the improvement in residential buildings, energy efficiency improvements in residential building in Lithuania. And here, this is an example of blending of grants and loans, and where indeed the grant component was fundamental to make sure that affordability was achieved. And learning from lessons in other countries that I will not have the time to present, such as Bulgaria, but also Estonia and others. Indeed, the blending of grants and loans was fundamental here. So here we work with the Apartment Building Renovation Fund, and the fund was co-financed by EU grants under ESIF, a loan by EBRD, domestic funds, and the CEB loan. And here, what's interesting is also the capacity really to reach in to bring to scale and to package interventions on over 200 sub-projects. And here what we see is that with a loan of about 100 million, we supported investment for over 400 million, with very significant expected energy consumption reduction of about 70%, and also again a sizable focus on low-income household, which is in the DNA of the bank. Here, the point being that grants will remain quite relevant, and the importance of targeting their use and properly blending it to maximize impact will remain very important going forward. I'm going to stop here. I have many more potential examples, but I would like to leave a little bit of time if there are any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monica, for this inspiring information. The very many information maybe not possible to grasp in this short moment. I was very impressed by the percentage of the possible energy efficiency savings. The 70% is something really incredible. So with this speed, we really can reach the targets of EU. Thank you very much. So we are now at the end of our panel, and I think that the panel has shown that there are very many good examples how to approach this answer for our opening question, how to enable really sustainable and energy efficient improvements of our housing without destroying the purses of the residents. I am very sorry that we couldn't have the Executive Vice President of the EU, Mr. Timmermans, with us, but I would like to quote from one of his recent speeches when he was actually addressing the issue of the EU's 2030 climate target. And he said, I quote, "Fairness is key. Our ambition should help, not hurt the most vulnerable in society. This transition will be just, or there will be no transition." End of quote. And I do believe that this quotation and this message should stay with us. We have learned today that we need to combine a lot of technical knowledge, financial instruments, communication with people to make the change to happen. And unless we do this in a really complex way, and this is always the biggest challenge, and unless we do it for a long time, and unless there is a long-standing interest of the highest level of the society, of these executive floors of our European building, we can't move further in a quick enough speed, I would say, to cope with all the sustainability challenges. Well, so we are at the end of the meeting. I would like to give the floor to David, to my co-chair, to summarize the outcome of the survey we had. It appears on the screen.
Thank you, Elena. I'm sure the poll results will appear on the screen in a moment. While we're waiting for them, could I, just before we conclude this whole event, give my huge thanks to our colleagues who have organized it. A brilliant piece of organization of what I think has been a really, really useful and constructive seminar, where there has been, despite the challenges, everyone has properly acknowledged the challenges. There's a lot of optimism that we can really make quite a significant difference. I do think it's important to hold on to that optimism and to seize this moment to make sure that this agenda properly lands. Just very briefly also about Mr. Timmermans, a great shame that he wasn't able to address this event today. But we do understand that a speech was written for our webinar, and we will encourage him through his team to record that so that we'll be able to put it on the website and people will be able to see it. So the results of today's poll, well, unsurprisingly, we basically think everyone has an important role to play in decarbonising the housing stock. Just in front is national governments. But if you look at this, all of these actors, us as individuals, international organisations, and the various places in between, what we have to get right is the idea, as we've discussed at length, that we need to have a very clear policy framework, support from national governments, from international institutions, and some funding support, but where a lot of the impetus will come from local delivery crafted for that local area in conjunction with the community and with individuals in the community. So what was the next poll? The name of an initiative which is helping to decarbonize the housing stock. Well, I'm pleased to see that Energisprong is part of that. KfW is the biggest of those. So there, I imagine the one that was mentioned most often, and certainly it is an example that I talk about. I'd love to see more banks there. Perhaps we should be adding CEB to this. And this slide, along with all of the others, will be available for people to look at afterwards. And then the final poll.
That is it, David. I'll try and actually
Oh,
share
did we
my
not have
screen.
the one about whether people thought national governments were doing enough?
Hold on a second. If you bear with me, I can give you the result of that poll. I have it on a different screen.
Don't worry about it, Dara. It was entirely clear. With only 2 or 3 exceptions, we think national governments are not doing enough. So let's
yes, I can give you the final poll. So it was three people said that yes, 43 people said no, and 6 people said they weren't sure. So yeah, overwhelmingly, people think governments are not doing enough to decarbonise the housing stock in their country.
It would be nice to know whether that was 3 people from the same country who said yes, or whether we actually have 3 separate countries that are examples of good practice. Perhaps we might dig a bit and find out. But thank you very much, everyone, and I'm going to pass back to Elena.
Thank you very much, David. I would also like to add my thanks to all those who are not visible, who are behind to this, I hope, successful event. And I do hope that we shall meet maybe one day also in person. I would like to especially thank to Glasgow, who is the long-term partner of UNECE, and really trying to bring the messages of Geneva UN Charter on Sustainable Housing further into practical life, because at the end of the day, it really is about how and where the people live better. Well, what are the future key events? I've outlined there are different topics covered by our conferences, and the next online conference will be in Slovenia in association with the government of Slovenia on 24th of February 21, and it will be actually about the topic of housing governance and regulation towards housing affordability. And the last of the 4 conferences will be online conference in April, on 14th of April 21, organized in association with the Irish Housing Agency, and this will focus on financing. So the title will be Housing Affordability through Access to Finance and Funding. Well, the originally planned final presentation was by Housing Europe in Helsinki, but because of pandemic, We don't know what's going to happen next year, but let's hope all together for the best. But anyhow, there will be online event organized by Housing Europe and will be announced later. And then we really do hope that the final study will be really presented at the UNECE ministerial meeting in October 21. So this is the future events. Next slide. And we would like to ask those who haven't done so yet, if you are aware of or tried or tested housing policy approaches which are functional, which can improve things, we want to hear about them. Please contact us at www.housing2030.org. Best practices by 31st May of 21. And we really do hope that we really select and collect as many good examples and inspiring examples across the region as possible. So thank you very much. And I would like to close with saying and repeating what Holger said about his orchestra. We all across Europe in different positions are like really the groups of instruments. And if we play together, we really can produce a lovely music. So let's hope for that. Bye.